Back with you tonight here on In Focus on Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. Thanks for staying on. The war in Ukraine, continuous climate change and the negative impact of COVID-19 are all pointing to a need for countries in the SADC region to come up with a regional and continental strategy that will ensure that food security and economies in the region can be protected from these outside forces and others like these. Here to unpack this with me, I'm joined by the Director for the Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development at the University of Johannesburg, Prof Simon Roberts. Prof, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. Good to have you tonight here on In Focus. Why should climate change or the climate change crisis be an urgent concern for South Africa and the region? I mean, one, looking at what we're reporting now, actually we're reporting a lot of rain, which in itself, okay, it's not a good thing, but there's been adequate rain, particularly in South Africa in the last 12 months.
Thanks, Tawa. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I think notwithstanding the rain that we have at the moment, it's really important to pay attention to the forecasts of climate change. South Africa and Southern Africa as a whole, in fact, is a hotspot. And so while we have good rains this year, over the time, Southern Africa is going to get much hotter than the global average. If the global average goes up by 2 degrees, Southern Africa is going to go up by 4 degrees. And we're going to have more extreme weather, and there's also going to be a drying. So we're being lulled into a bit of a false sense of security by the rains at the moment, in actual fact. We should be using this window as a window of opportunity to prepare for the future weather events to come.
Do we have a plan in place, a resilient regional strategy in terms of the value chain, and what would that actually look like for SADC?
So our work shows that there's a risk, a very big risk for South Africa, but there's also a really big opportunity because some of the best resources, water resources and land resources in the world to expand agriculture are actually to the north of us. So in countries like Zambia, the southwest of Tanzania, there's really good availability of water and land. But what we're not doing is we're not looking at how to build regional value chains. That's the linkages from the agricultural production in countries like Zambia through to the food processing industries that we have to serve the cities and the urban consumers and the rural consumers. So we're not making those linkages. We're still importing from South America, for example, animal feed for poultry, rather than looking at sourcing within the SADC region. And if we don't look at building these linkages, then we're going to be much more vulnerable to the climate change events that come. I think the Ukraine crisis, which we may be coming on to, really shows also how vulnerable we are to the global market developments if we don't build these local and regional stronger linkages.
Yeah, and of course we are dealing with climate change, but also the other thing that we are dealing with on the continent is a growing move of the population towards urban areas. How does this then impact on that strategy, and how would we need to approach that as a region to address the kind of need that we have?
So, I mean, as a whole, I think it's important to understand that the region as a whole is already a net food importer. Now, this shouldn't be the case. We've got the land resources, the water resources to meet our own needs. But as a whole, the region is a net food importer. And as we have increasing urbanization, not just in South Africa, but also in countries such as Tanzania, Dar es Salaam growing, Maputo and Mozambique, it means that the urban populations are eating more and more meat products and more processed food products. And so there's an opportunity for agriculture to meet that demand. There's also a real problem in that at the moment that's leading to more imports. So we're facing a situation where unless we deal with this through a kind of regional strategy, a regional plan, we're going to be more exposed to global market developments rather than less exposed. Yeah. In actual fact, our research, which looks at the maize and the poultry and sugar to confectionery value chains, shows there's this massive potential for Southern Africa to actually be an exporter of food to the world market instead of being a net importer as we are at the moment.
How well are the markets working?
Sorry, can you come again?
I mean, how well are the markets working in South Africa as well as in the region?
So at the moment, I mean, our research shows that the markets are really broken in the sense that it's cheaper for us in South Africa to import oil cake from Argentina into Gauteng than to import it from Zambia 1,500 kilometers or so to the north. I mean, this makes no sense. We have a regional integration agenda, but we're not following through in terms of the actions. The transport costs are very high, there's lots of border restrictions, and we're not building the linkages such as around standards to make sure that it's easy and effective to transport products across those borders. If you're a poultry producer looking at producing poultry for the Gauteng market, you need animal feed cheaply, cost-effectively. That's your competitive base. And that animal feed is and should be available within the region. But instead, you're not able to access that cheaply, both the production costs but also the transport costs.
So if you were the South African government, you're the Minister of Agriculture, you're involved in charge, of course, of the policy direction, but also if you were in the department and you are the accounting officer, where would you be putting your money right now?
So first of all, I think that we've got master plans in South Africa which are national. We have a poultry master plan, which is a national master plan. We have a sugar master plan, which is a national master plan. But, if you look at what the companies are doing and you look at the patterns of production and consumption, there's no real border between South Africa and, say, Gaborone and Botswana, or even if we're looking further afield. We should be thinking right away about a regional strategy to build competitive industries across the countries of the region as a whole. That's the first thing that needs to change. The second thing that needs to change is taking this medium-term and longer-term view towards climate change and saying, how do we manage and use the water resources in the region most effectively? Now, that means increasing irrigation, not in South Africa, but increasing irrigation and water management in countries like Zambia. That requires technology, investment, manufacture products, which South Africa is able to produce as well. So we've got an export opportunity if there's wider growth in countries with those water resources. And we're not seeing these interlinkages being realized in the strategies. And thirdly, SADC's got an action plan for climate change, hasn't been updated since 2015, and it's not flowing through towards concrete actions in terms of the development finance that's required, the harmonization of the standards, and simply making it easier to do business across the region as a whole. We're still thinking nationally, and meanwhile, we're seeing the weather events which are going to impact on the region as a whole, and those are going to come down the line and going to hit us really hard when the next El Nino year comes, which is when we have big droughts in southern Africa. The last big drought we had was in 2015, 2016, and we were short of maize. That's going to happen again, and all scientists are saying it's going to be worse than it was last time. The question is, where are we going to be able to source that maize from? The answer is the potential is there if we are supporting agricultural production across the region to make sure the whole region is much more resilient to deal with the effects of extreme weather.
Yeah. With the Russia-Ukraine conflict, of course, there's been a talk around our reliance on imports and whether or not there is a possibility of us weaning ourselves off that. But there's a broader conversation, of course, when it comes to agriculture, especially in South Africa and maybe also in the region of the transformation of the sector so that it becomes a little bit more inclusive. What are the bottlenecks?
I think the Ukraine and Russian crisis really points out the cost of being vulnerable. In terms of the world trade of sunflower oil, wheat, etc., these are really, really important exporters to the world, not just to us. And so we're seeing food prices going up around the world. But there is this potential for us to be self-sufficient in growing all of these commodities if we're thinking about it across the region. So if you're looking at sunflower into vegetable oil, or the soybeans into animal feed, you need to think about linking up the production right through to the crushing and the processing and the manufacturing of the products through to the retailing in the supermarkets. We've got all those capabilities and that potential here. In terms of the more inclusive participation, when we're actually looking at countries like Zambia and the work that we've done there, and Tanzania, it's actually small and medium-sized farmers who are leading the way in terms of the increased production of soybeans and animal feed through to some of the production of poultry. They're already showing us what's possible in actual fact. And that means getting the full package right. It means providing the advice to the small and medium farmers. It means making sure that they're getting fair prices for their products. They're getting fair prices for their products, and they also have the infrastructure that they require. So, for example, they need to be able to invest in irrigation systems. They need to be able to look at storing product when after the harvest. They don't have to accept very low prices just at the harvest, and then prices go up afterwards. So storage is there, and transport services. This is really the nuts, getting the nuts and bolts right, but getting it right across borders. If you look at a country such as Brazil, they've done this within a country, but their country is so large that if we placed it on top of Southern Africa, it would cover the whole region. We need to do this across borders because of the colonial legacy of where the borders were drawn. And that's the challenge of regional integration and regional cooperation. We need to step up to that challenge.
And if we are then talking what areas, Prof, we need to be investing in now, you are saying storage, making sure that we bring in a lot of infrastructure around that. There's been a whole lot of talk around providing land. Is that the right investment that should be the focus right now?
So, I mean, it's important to realize that there really is a very, very good arable land, good availability of water in countries like Zambia and Tanzania, Malawi, like I said. So, I mean, these are areas where there's this massive potential. The cost of increasing production. So fertilizer is also important, seed is also important, as I said, irrigation, transport services. It's all of these things around essentially the production system that will make those activities more and more profitable. And we need to think about linking all of those things up. So it's no good having one tool in the toolbox. You know, we say provide finance, without looking at providing the capabilities, the know-how, linking up the standards, and making sure that the transport works. Otherwise, you're going to produce a lot of agricultural commodities in those countries, but you're not going to be able to get it to market, which is getting it into the market where the big cities are. So it's just joined up interventions that are so important. Now, the good news is that it's happening to a large extent already, but it's not happening fast enough. So the IDC has, for example, supported investments in storage facilities in Lusaka in Zambia. They have supported investments in crushing facilities there. But the potential is really large, and the risks are also very, very big if we don't move quickly to substantially ramp up production to meet demand. Because as I said, we're still facing this large net deficit in terms of food and agricultural products. And climate change is going to make that potentially worse if we don't respond really, really quickly. So it's a bit of we need to have a kind of a wake-up call. And the problem is that the rains that we have now, everybody says, well, climate change, what's the problem? Well, when the next big drought comes, we'll really see it, and it'll really hit us very, very hard. The scientists are saying, we've been telling you, we're telling you, and the question is, where's the action happening? And that's what we need urgently from the political leaders across the region.
You're making a case for a market observatory. What is that, and how does it work?
The Market Observatory is an initiative that we've started at the University of Johannesburg in the research center, and it's really looking at the prices of products across the region to see whether the markets are working. And what we're finding is quite scary in the sense that we're finding these really big gaps between the prices of products which are delivered into Gauteng, for example, into Dar es Salaam, and the prices that farmers are getting. Farmers are getting very low prices, and yet prices of the products delivered to the cities are very, very high. There's a really big gap. That's a problem of transport. There's potentially issues around market power of the traders, problems of storage facilities like I've talked about. So the markets are simply not working effectively. The observatory is to provide information to allow producers to make better decisions. So farmers to realize where there may be better prices, but also for other market participants, small and medium traders and processors to come into those markets. And so the Market Observatory is tracking the prices of commodities and just enabling us to see what is happening. If we can't see it, then it's difficult for people to make informed decisions. I have to say, we didn't think we were going to be actually collecting the prices. We thought that this price data was going to be there. When we started looking at prices, price data on wholesale prices, and what does it cost to source a ton of the commodity, the data is really poor. So the observatory is collecting this data and putting it in one place as a public good for people to use. And we're doing research then on the value chains to support the interventions on a regional footing, as I've said already.
Prof, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for sharing that information with us. Director for the Center for Competition, Regulation and Economic Development at the University of Johannesburg, Prof Simon Roberts. Let's look now.